Roger, the witch hunt against President Trump and the fake Russian collusion narrative being waged against him is backfiring on the Democrats, and anyone doing critical research into this realizes that they still haven't proved with a lick of evidence that Trump colluded with Russia.
Well, and Owen, I think it's very important to point out this extraordinary interview with Laura Ingraham by White House Chief of Staff John Kelly. Let me read here for a moment from the Daily Wire. President Donald Trump's chief of staff said Monday that the Justice Department should appoint a special counsel to investigate the Democrats. John Kelly called for a probe into that controversial uranium deal that occurred during the administration of former President Barack Obama. He also wants an investigation into the dossier compiled on Donald Trump during the 2006 presidential campaign, filled with false allegations of wrongdoing. Oh, and the story here is pretty clear. Somebody over at the White House is watching the war room, because as you know, this is exactly what we advocated yesterday. The appointment of a special prosecutor charged specifically with investigating Uranium One would essentially immobilize those up to their knees in the cover-up. Those would be former FBI Director Robert Mueller, former FBI Director James Comey, current Associate FBI Director Andrew McCabe. He's the one who, of course, authorized the federal payments to GPS Fusion for the dirty dossier. And then lastly, lo and behold, former U.S. Attorney, now Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein. Now that's a motley crew. Donald Trump doesn't have to fire anybody, but assuming that quartet is under federal investigation, they would, under the rules, have to step down from their current positions.
And as you said, this is an interview from General Kelly. I mean, that is huge that this would come from the lips of General Kelly last night on the new Fox show, the Ingraham Angle. It makes me wonder, Roger, and I'd like to get your expert analysis on this, or even your insider take if you have some insider knowledge. How much are, just for lack of a better phrase, how much are Trump and his cabinet that are on Trump's side and not in the deep state playing possum with this Russian investigation, only to let them dig themselves a hole so deep that when it comes back on them, they can't get out?
Well, I think that the White House realizes, Owen, that when Robert Mueller fired his first salvo, he missed. He indicted Paul Manafort and his longtime deputy, a guy I know, Rick Gates, for tax and money laundering conspiracies and also for reporting violations under both the Foreign Agents Registration Act and the Foreign Bank Account Reporting Act, false statements against the Foreign Agent Registration Act, and other false statements. It's ironic that all of these counts involve the proceeds of Manafort's lobbying activities, but more importantly, his political consulting on behalf of the ruling party of Ukraine, which was, as you know, overthrown by the British in the Obama administration in a coup that was led by neo-Nazis in 2014. That's right. The Obama administration helped neo-Nazis overthrow the democratically elected government of Ukraine, elected with the assistance of Paul Manafort, perfectly legally, I might add. And at the same time, because I think Mueller wanted to avoid the obvious, which is that none of these charges relate to Russian collusion, he threw in this fellow, George Papadopoulos, who it appears to me to be a volunteer on the Trump campaign, a member of a paper foreign policy advisory committee with almost 50 members, a committee that met once, never met with Donald Trump. And it's very clear that this guy Papadopoulos had no authority whatsoever in the Trump campaign.
And I think that the reason Trump is calling him out for pleading guilty is because he kind of looks at it as a cowardly act. that he didn't have to do that, but I guess we'll find out about that. But regardless, as you said, Roger, this was a peon, if he even had that status in Trump's campaign. I mean, he was a nothing, really, in Trump's campaign. So, again, it really doesn't have anything to do with Trump colluding with Russia, but it's also worth mentioning George Soros was also responsible in some of the funding that went into the overthrow of Ukraine. I think, though, that the most sickening part of this, Roger, is that when you get down to the nitty-gritty about this litigation process that's being waged against Manafort and Gates right now, the two judges that are going to be hearing this case, a Clinton appointee and an Obama appointee in the D.C. grand jury area that is pulled from the population that voted 93% for Hillary, highest in the nation. If that isn't a pig circus, I don't know what is.
Well, and despite the fact that I think this is a very weak case, Owen, Manafort and his lawyers must be concerned about the jury pool in D.C. And the fact that he is clearly facing two politicized judges. Yeah, I really do think Mueller took his shot here prematurely because they needed to counteract the media frenzy, which occurred, when the House Intelligence Committee secured the bank records of Fusion GPS, the firm which hired M16's Orbis Intelligence and the former British intelligence agent Christopher Steele to peddle trash for cash against Manafort and at the behest of the Clinton campaign and the DNC. The so-called dirty dossier, the keystone of what Alex Jones called Pee-Pee-Gate, as Steele's work is called around InfoWars, peddled the lie that Trump was just a Manchurian candidate completely controlled by Putin as a result of these alleged sexual deviancies. At the same time, the FBI will turn over its Christopher Steele file this week to the House Intelligence Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committee, who began exploring collusion between the Clintons, the Obama administration, the FBI in their first attempt to wreck Donald Trump's campaign and now his presidency. The coup was beginning to implode. That's why Mueller had to make his move. And it's ironic that it comes just on the eve of the president's historic trip to China. Therefore, I guess the globalists thought that crucial action was needed, and therefore they rolled out the trumped-up Manafort, Gates, Papadopoulos charges.
Yeah, and of course, again, for the reason that you just mentioned, they got the bank records from Fusion GPS, and the entire Clinton Uranium One deal was entering the fold in all of, fair media out there. It was really hitting the fold again on social media, so they had to do something to derail that momentum. And I think that bringing these charges against Manafort is exactly to do that, just to distract from the truth. But Roger, I was thinking maybe in the segment with Jerry Corsi earlier that they're going to try to drag this out over 4 years to try to use this as a character assassination against Trump for 4 years.
Well, it's interesting to me that Mueller assigned this hit job to his protege, Andrew Weissman. This guy, Weissman, is known for multiple incidents of rabid prosecutorial misconduct during the Enron investigations and uses tactics such as fabricated indictments against family members to turn targets into prosecutorial witnesses. It's an outrage, Owen.
Yep, and he also uses intimidation tactics as well. We'll be right back on the other side of this break with Roger Stone and more of The War Room. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to The War Room, folks. We've got Roger Stone on the line with us. Quick update. Again, there has been a truck attack and a shooting at the same time, perhaps the same person in New York City, in Manhattan. A rented truck hops onto the pedestrian walkway bicycle area, kills at least 6 people, injures multiple others, and they are now investigating it as a terror attack. We do have some images of the suspect that was arrested, and though you can't really see much, you can tell that he has a big beard. Nothing wrong with that, but that does point to one thing: radical Islamic terror. And that, strangely enough, he was apparently wielding a paintball gun and a BB gun, which just adds more questions as to why he had those and how there could have been a shooting. If that was the case, where was the gun that shot people? But we'll continue to keep our tabs on that as details develop there. Let's now go back to Roger Stone. Let's pick it up where we left off, Roger. I think that they've basically, because of the indictment of Manafort, they've basically said this is pretty much all we got. I mean, they've been looking into Trump, his family, and everything. And if this is what they're coming down with, I think to me that says that this is what we got. This is what we're going to use. And because it's a nothing burger, I think they're going to have to continue to kind of keep feeding their brainwashed minions crap, literally, like, you know, the old saying, you know, feed them crap and keep them in the dark. They're going to keep feeding their brainwashed minions crap, and they're going to continue to believe in this Trump-Russia collusion thing because this Manafort case is just going to kind of sit in limbo for the next 3 years.
Well, Owen, it's extraordinary that the prosecutor sought and the magistrate agreed to a $10 million bail for Manafort and house arrest in lieu of detention, a $5 million bail for Gates, also with house arrest. This is ridiculously punitive in a white-collar case, particularly since Manafort was informed, as we told you first right here at InfoWars, that he would be indicted, and he poses no flight risk. I'd like to focus for a moment on this fellow Papadopoulos because something here doesn't smell right. His charges are based on FBI interviews that were conducted in January, February 2016. That's before the firing of FBI Director Comey and before Mueller was even appointed special counsel. Papadopoulos has degrees from DePaul University in Chicago, from the University of London, and from the London School of Economics. Now, here's what's strange. His entire work history is rabidly anti-Russian and anti-China. It also seems to be very connected to the intelligence community. He was at the Jamestown Foundation here in the United States. First, then following his advanced degrees, he was a research associate at the Super Neocon Hudson Institute. Then, following his time at Hudson, he moved to London to work for a British company. Followed after that as a director of the Center of International Energy and National Resource Law and Security, a division of the London Center for International Law Practice. Now, he was the chief foreign policy advisor for Ben Carson. And of course, Ben Carson's foreign policy team was headed by the former CIA rogue Dewey Claridge. This is the guy who ran Iran-Contra. Remember Iran-Contra? They were selling drugs illegally in the United States to illegally finance the war in Central America after Congress cut off U.S. funds in the Boland Amendment. So according to the wild tale that this guy Papadopoulos tells, he met somebody in a London bar, a professor named Joseph Mifsud, who claimed he had deep ties to the Kremlin. Mifsud told Papadopoulos that the Russians had thousands of emails of Hillary and dirt on her, at which point Papadopoulos starts bombarding the Trump campaign with emails about setting up an official meeting between the Russians and Donald Trump. He keeps saying the Russians are on board on this. No evidence of that. No meeting ever really happens. Donald Trump knows nothing about this. Evidently, Paul Manafort says in writing at the time, absolutely not. Who is this guy? He's poison. So this is the source of an indictment. So this looks like a setup to me, very much like the setup of Donald Trump Jr. in the meeting with the Russian lawyer who has no visa to get in the United States. But boom, there she is.
Yeah, and then she's also sitting on the Hill during congressional meetings. I want to read this tweet from President Trump where he essentially called out Papadopoulos, and I wanted to get your opinion on that. I'm trying to scroll through Trump's tweets here to find that, but essentially I think he was saying that Papadopoulos was, here we go. The fake news is working overtime, as Paul Manafort's lawyer said. There was no collusion, and events mentioned took place long before he came to the campaign. Few people knew the young, low-level volunteer named George, who has already proven to be a liar. Check the Dems. What do you make of President Trump calling Papadopoulos a liar?
Well, I think that's exactly right. It appears that he was wearing a wire for almost 3 months, which sounds to me like entrapment. If this is Robert Mueller's big witness, I think he's got a loser on his hands. Now, I got to tell you, Owen, I've been in 10 Republican presidential campaigns, or I should say 9 Republican presidential campaigns and 1 Libertarian presidential campaign for my good friend Gary Johnson. And I can tell you, it is standard to set up these issue advisory committees, which are entirely pro forma. They're paper. They're for the purposes of a press release. This guy had no authority, wasn't on the payroll, didn't even have a security pass for the headquarters. He wasn't allowed in the place without having an appointment with somebody. Yet, from the outside, he starts bombarding the Trump campaign officials, including Rick Dearborn, the chief issues coordinator, with this idea to have meetings in London at the highest level with officials from the Kremlin, and yes, including Donald J. Trump himself. That was the proposal. I want to stress again, no such meeting ever happened. And Manafort specifically mixed these meetings in writing. But here's the rub, Owen. These emails were turned over to Mr. Mueller by the Trump White House, by the Trump campaign, which proves that the lawyer, Ty Cobb, who represents the president and says, oh, just give Mueller everything he wants. He's a good guy. He'll understand. That is exactly wrong-headed. You're handing Mr. Mueller the rope that he will fashion to try, illegitimately, to hang you.
Do you think there's an assumption on Ty Cobb's behalf that the American people are smart enough not to fall for it?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure about any lawyer who goes around naming himself after a famous baseball player. What's that all about?
Well, I don't know if he named himself that, Roger.
Well, I mean, he could have done something a bit more original, or maybe his parents should have. In any event, look, there's 2 schools of thought there. One is that you cooperate with Mueller, and he'll determine that there was nothing there that's indictable. There is no Russian collusion, and he'll just go away. That is the view of a naive, non-political reporter who doesn't understand that this is plan A of the globalists. Plan A. Robert Mueller flips Paul Manafort and gets Paul Manafort, who's facing a long time in jail and millions in fines, to bear false witness against the president, say, okay, yes, you've got me. I was colluding with the Russians.
But you don't suspect that's going to happen.
I think there's 0 chance that happens, which means move to Plan B, the 25th Amendment. You heard it here on InfoWars first, folks. This is coming. There is an effort that will be run largely by Republicans to declare the president non-compos mentis and to put the vice president into the Oval Office and then allow him to choose a vice president subject to confirmation by the U.S. Senate. And that individual is planned to be none other than Congressman Speaker Paul Ryan.
Ugh. Oh, sorry, Roger. I just vomited a little bit on air. Roger, thank you for the excellent intel and expertise as usual. Final 10 seconds here. Anything to share with our audience?
I will be broadcasting out of Austin tomorrow. I will be filling in for Alex Jones in the latter part of his show, and I'll be joining you live on the War Room. And we're going to have a special report on the 25th Amendment scheme that is coming down the road.
There it is, folks. Don't go anywhere.